What is the Gnostic belief, and does it have a connection with Hermes Trismegistus?
Yes, you see, the thing is, the Gnostic movement started in the 1st century AD and it lasted for about 3 or 4 centuries before it was, forbidden by the Church of Rome. Hermes Trismegistus, the roots of that comes very early. About 15 centuries BC or 14 centuries BC. So I have to, in order to explain this Gnostic views and beliefs and its connection with the Hermes Trismegistus, I have to start from the origin. As we said before, that during the 18th dynasty Egypt, Amarna kings, Akhenaten, the son of Amenhotep III, came to the conclusion, or came to, the view that as well as the human being have a spiritual ka, the belief, spiritual dimension, and the physical dimension, also the cosmos, the universe, has a spiritual dimension, which he is identified as Aten, or the light. And this is the source, to tell you the truth, this is the first human individual that came to this conclusion. And from then onwards, philosophy, theology, the whole universe started to change. According to the stories we have, Hermes Trismegistus was a contemporary person with Moses. Contemporary with Moses. On the other hand, we have, from historical sources, we have Manetho, an Egyptian historian who lived in the 3rd century BC in Alexandria and wrote the ancient history of Egypt, as well as writing the stories of ancient Egypt from historical documents he had in his temple of Heliopolis and Memphis. He also used some information that were available to him from popular traditions. There were some stories that were forbidden by the authorities to be written officially in official records, but it was remembered by the masses, by the people, generation after generation, until it became a written part of Egyptian history. He was a historian. He is not talking about mythology. He was a historian, so he was writing history. And because in Alexandria during the 3rd century BC, the Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, sent some people to get to Jerusalem to get some biblical Jewish scholars to come to Alexandria, and there they did the first translation from Hebrew of the first 5 books of the Torah, first 5 books of the Old Testament, translated from Hebrew to Greek in Alexandria. So the story of Moses and the Exodus and the Jewish community, the Israelites and so on, did exist, was taught and represented part of the books in the Library of Alexandria from the 3rd century BC. At the same time as Manetho, because Manetho was the first person to write ancient Egyptian history at that time for the library. So when Manetho read the text of the Bible, of the story of Moses in the Bible, Manetho automatically, directly identified Moses as an Egyptian, because this was the story traditionally served in Egypt, because you see, when somebody has Moses Mos or Moses was an Egyptian word, not a Hebrew word, an Egyptian name. Tutmos, Mos is a, and because Akhenaten, after being, forced to abdicate his power and his throne, he lost his name. The name is part of his identity as a king. Now, when he left this, his name should not be mentioned. So in that case, people refer to him as Mos or Moses, which means the son, the illegitimate son of Amenhotep III. So Moses is an Egyptian, and in fact, it was Sigmund Freud who confirmed this story, that the word Moses, the name Moses, is not a Hebrew. The other one would have been Moshal, to take out of the water. It's Moshal, not Moses. Moses is an Egyptian word and not a Hebrew word, you see. So, and also Manetho, the same guy, the same author, the same historian, who wrote that Moses was an Egyptian who lived in the 18th century, 18th dynasty, mid 14th century BC, also wrote about son of Habu, whom I have, Amenhotep, son of Habu, whom the architect, whom I identified as Hiram Abif, the builder. Hiram Abif and son of Habu were, strangely enough, as well as writing about Moses being an Egyptian who lived in the 18th dynasty, he also wrote, Manetho, as a historian, he wrote that son of Habu was contemporary to Moses, and we know from the story of Hermes that Hermes was contemporary of Moses. So we have here confirmation that they were contemporary, and in fact it was son of Habu, Hiram Abif, the historian, son of Habu, who warned Amenhotep III of the new revolution of Akhenaten by identifying a supreme power that cannot be seen, but it can be light, identified in light. And by the way, light here is not the light we have. Its light is light of knowledge. It's when you know. We will come to that later. Mm-hmm. The different
subjects.
Yeah. So also it was at the very same time. The whole thing, the roots of the whole belief started at that time, in the middle of the 18th century Egyptian history. Amenhotep III, Akhenaten was forced to abdicate his power to his son Tutankhamun, and Tutankhamun made a very important step by allowing the old deities to be mediators, because people could not reach God directly, so they needed mediators. So he reopened the old temples, and allowing in this way the Ammon and Osiris and all these deities to become mediators, you see. So the idea of a universal, a spiritual being and mediators appeared at that time for the first time in history, mid 14th century BC. Now, Akhenaten died, Tutankhamun was killed. Tutankhamun, I have identified Tutankhamun as Joshua, the son of Nun, successor of Moses. Okay? So, when they died, when the whole thing was suppressed by the Egyptian Ammonites, by 19th dynasty came to Ramessides completely forbade even the mention of these kings and all obviously their beliefs as well. But within the cult of son of Habu, he had his statue in the temple, and people went to worship him. I mean, asking him to mediate with the gods, and also he became a healer and a savior and many other things. You see, with time, it took about maybe 12 centuries. They regarded within the cult. I mean, he had followers who represented some people, intellectuals, and believers in him. Within time, they regarded him not as a holy man, but as a god, indicating that some holy man, some man who knows the secrets of God, can also be God. Not God to be worshipped in the sense. I mean, we have to come later. I mean, it took a long time. It didn't happen one day. It doesn't take. I mean, it takes a long time within the for these ideas to be clear in the mind. So, what triggered the next step was the fact that when the Romans came 30 years BC, during the reign of Cleopatra VII, 30 years BC, they kept the temple of Serapis in Alexandria, and because it was Alexandria, the capital of Egypt, but they closed all other temples. They didn't close it by order, just stopped financing the temples, and without money the priests went home, and there was no no temple, no priesthood, for Egypt. People were there without priesthood, without somebody to so a new kind of ideas started to go within the cult of Hermes Trismegistus, within the cult of son of Habu, whom I identified, not me, everybody identified as being Hermes Trismegistus, which I think be the same person as Hiram Abiff. Within the cult, I mean, it has developed at that time for magic and for herbal kind of treatment for the sick. It was kind of medic. I mean, they started as therapeutes, the healers, and these people, without the priesthood around, without the system of the deities and the worship and so on in the temple, they became lost. They felt lost. They needed salvation. They needed to know. They needed, and for the first time, because as I said before, Egyptians thought about the origin of life. Who are we? Is there a creator for the world? Why do we die? And what is after death? All these questions, philosophical and religious, and they open mind about that. So we know from Philo of Alexandria about this therapeutics. They started, they lived separately. Each person, men and women, young and old, they left the towns and they lived in the desert or outside the main towns, each one on his own for a few days, and then they gathered together in a Sabbath or something, and to have a meal together, and they talk. Each one of them talks. What they wanted to know now. Here what happened is there's no official worship, there's no official in the temple. There's no priest to tell them what it is right and what it is wrong. So they started to think. Obviously, the root of the thinking was concentrated on the message that has been developed from the time of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, the universal God. And so they started to think, and they came to the conclusion that the origin of universe was as a light, a spiritual father. They call him the father of the universe. The father is light. And that this father, from this father, emanated some ions, I mean, some kind of mediators emanated. They were not created, they emanated from the father. One of these was called Sophia, a female element called Sophia, emanated from the father, from the spiritual unseen father representing light. And this Sophia, also from Sophia, emanated what became known as God the Creator, who created the cosmos, the physical cosmos.
Is Sophia related to the Sufism?
Sophia is the wisdom, you see, and from wisdom emanated the God of the Bible. The Bible God is the Creator. The created the world in 7 days. I mean, this is not the God the Father. The God the Father did not create this. Physical existence. This the cosmos was not created by the Father, but by the God. Who was emanated from Sophia. You see, and this is a God which we worship nowadays. I mean, Christian, Muslims, and Jew. This is the God, the Creator. You see, but God the Father is not the Creator. And from the start, we can see that the creation is not really. There's something wrong with the. We die, for instance. We have accidents. We can be sick. There are some troubles. We are not safe. Yeah. The world is not safe. The fire, accidents, death, and whatever it is. So the Father could not have created such evil and goodness at the same time. The Father is only good. He cannot create this here. So the thing is, this is how the Gnostic philosophy started to appear. No teacher got it. It was from within, you see, and they believed they could see, they could identify that within the human physical body, although created by this God in the middle way, they still have some part of the original fathers. Christ says, "You are the children of my Father," which is Father, the real Father. The real Spirit. So, but they believed in this way. Salvation is by becoming part of the Father, not of God, but the Father, the original Spirit, which is so. You cannot reach that. Gnostics means the knowledge, seeking knowledge. People who seek knowledge, but not knowledge of the universe, not knowledge that comes through the senses, but not knowledge that comes through the mind. Because you see, the mind, we see things through the mind. The mind, through different senses, can identify images and sounds and everything else. It's the mind that can hear and see, and it's the mind that make us feel things, not the eyes or the ears. The eyes just send a message, but the mind recognizes the picture. You see, so our minds always, all the time, sends waves, electric waves, and receives electric waves.
Like the six senses.
Yeah, it is. So we can see, if we are trained, if we are put in the right kind of situation, through rituals, through abstaining from certain foods and certain activities. If we consider, not everybody can do it, but you can see the unseen. You can reach the real Father. And it is there, those who achieve this status, there and then become one with God. They are the Son of the Father, not only Christ. They are the Son of the Father. There and there, once you can, if you can reach within yourself, it is inside, knowledge from inside, not from outside. It's not through the senses, it's through the minds. If your mind can open and see the unseen one, then you have become yourself part of God. You have become God. Exactly like Hermes Trismegistus. You have become God. This is the belief of the Gnostics, you see. And this is salvation. Then the physical body, because God the Creator created physics, and what is physical can perish, but what is spiritual cannot perish. It is eternal. It is going back to the Father. Not everybody can achieve that. It is people who can reach through it. I mean, special training, a special teaching, a special desire to reach, and ability to understand. Then they are saved. There and then they have been saved. Okay, this is the Gnostic movement. This is the beginning of the first century AD. This happened, you see. Now, because the roots of the story, the historical roots of the story, so Moses and Jesus, Joshua, you see, at that time in the first century AD, there is in the Bible translated in Greek, there is only one Iosos, only one Jesus. The word Jesus at that time could only refer to the son of Joshua, the son of Nun, because this is a Greek translation. Joshua and Jesus. Jesus is the Iosos is the Greek word for Joshua, and the translation that took place in Alexandria of the Old Testament, the name Joshua became Iosos, became Jesus. So and they know exactly as they knew that Moses was contemporary or lived in the 18th dynasty. They also knew about Joshua. They called him Jesus because this is what was happening in Alexander Library. His name was Jesus, Iosos. His name was Jesus, the only Jesus he had. So, and they knew that he was killed. And they knew that after his killing, he was risen from the dead, not physically. The rising from the dead here is not physically like the New Testament talks about Jesus getting up and meeting. It's not physically. This is a spiritual rising from the dead, you see. So the name, within the Nag Hammadi, we have the Nag Hammadi documents, which is found in 1945 in Upper Egypt. They do have about 52 text codices, and they do have at least 3 hermetic texts within the Nag Hammadi, and they do have Gospels in Coptic, but the Gospels in Coptic found there is not like the Gospels in the New Testament. For instance, there is no virgin birth. Mary is not the there is no Pontius Pilate killing him. There is no time or location for Jesus. No time and location. And then again, the Gospel of Philip, one of the Gospel Coptic Gospel, talks about Mary Magdalene as the companion of Jesus, whom he loved more than anybody else of his disciples, and he kissed her in the mouth. I mean, she was his wife rather than the New Testament made his completely different character. So this was the beginning of the Christian thing when they put the message as the Son of God being somebody who was been killed, Joshua who was killed, and I mean, within the not all the Nag Hammadi talk about Jesus, but those who talk about Jesus identified him as one who became Son of God because he was killed and he was risen from the dead. Also, obviously, Hermes had the same situation before. So, if you look at the very until just before the end of the 2nd century AD, we have no other stories. We have no other New Testament story accounts. I mean, Mark, Luke, and John, and Matthew had not been written yet. And St. Paul never spoke about Jesus being crucified by Pontius Pilate, about Mary, Virgin. Exactly, St. Paul, who spread Christianity, early Christianity, never spoke in his letters about any of these things, you see. Now, in Rome, I mean, the church in Rome started to think. Rome was the center of political power. I mean, what is the idea of, because the Christian, as well as the ISIS movement, Egyptian, was spread to Rome. Also, this Gnostic Christian beliefs went to Rome as well. So the Church of Rome was originally a Gnostic church as well, because this Christianity was created within the Gnostic community. So, but because Rome was a political center of the empire, and as such, they thought about how can we be masters, how can we control the movement, because until that time there was no master. I mean, every meeting these people gathered, any one of them, young or old, man or woman, can take the seat and talk. You see, there's no priesthood. Now the priest decided to take over and turn this movement, because the Christian movement in the 1st century was very popular. I mean, salvation, you can have salvation on your own, with your own self. You don't need to be mummified, you don't need to have a priesthood, you don't need anything. So it was millions of people went out, not only in Egypt but also in other countries, you see. So the thing is, Rome started to say, no, this is heresy. This is heresy. And they started to make the creed. Things you have to confess, to accept, to be guarded as a Christian. You have to accept the virgin birth, you have to accept the thing, and gradually, the first creed was in the 2nd century, then the 3rd century, the 4th century. Every time they put a creed, you have to identify Son of God from the Virgin, who was crucified by Pontius Pilate, who raised the 3rd day, and this sort of thing. And anybody who cannot confess these creeds is a heretic. And they dismiss. I mean, obviously, in the beginning, from the end of the 2nd century, with Bishop Irenaeus of France, Bishop Irenaeus, who wrote about this heresy. They called it heresy. Until that time, there was nothing except heresy, because this is what Christianity was. This was born in this womb. But these bishops of Rome started to say, no, we have to have a community, a church, and the church is a community with three stages of priesthood, and you have to accept the supremacy of the church and accept it. So they made the creed, and they eventually made the Gospels of the New Testament, and they historized the dates of Christ and the events of his death and life, and they made his location in Bethlehem and in Jerusalem and so on. It was the whole movement started in Egypt, not in Palestine. At that, no, never in Palestine. The whole movement started in Egypt. It came to Palestine later on, even later than the 2nd century. Only from the time that Constantine the Great adopted Christianity in 325 AD, and his mother came to Jerusalem, and in the temple of Minerva, Roman temple of Minerva, she found a block of wood, and she said, "This is the cross of Jesus." And then they started to recognize this area as a holy land for the Christians. You see, so the whole thing then. The Gnostics became. All the books were burned out. The Nag Hammadi documents had to be hidden because all written documents were burned down, which have all. And then the people themselves, the Gnostics themselves, were persecuted and killed all over the place. And that's how the Christian Church of Rome established what they regarded as Orthodox, the right way, and Catholic, the universal way. Nobody would have any right to have anything different. And that is the origin. So Gnostics only, obviously, some people, believers of that kind of thing still remain, but very few, spread in Europe, and even during the Middle Ages and so on. But they were hidden or persecuted that's why they keep secret until now. Even when they still regard themselves as a secret, because they still have this inherited the fear of the church, although the church is no longer that strong. And since the Renaissance and the translation of the old document, and even more recently, when 1945 the Nag Hammadi documents were found, they were able to find the original text and the original beliefs of the Gnostics who established Christianity and lost it. And some people in America and Europe now, obviously there are few, but still believe strongly now, recreated the Gnostic beliefs again within a specific few communities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osman. We will carry on for different subject in the next part.
Thank you.
Thank you.